So I'm a kind of unlikely candidate to be a school lunch advocate. Like most of you, I've spent my entire career in white tablecloth restaurants and really didn't know what kids ate. I don't have kids. And like many of you, my worst nightmare was 8:30 on a Saturday night when the server or host came in the kitchen and went, "I've got screaming children on 19, what should I do?" And usually my answer was, ask them to leave, because I didn't know what to do. And I really didn't know what they should be eating, and all I knew is they were ruining the dining experience for everybody else. But I started really getting into sustainability, and in the late 1990s, I wrote a book called Bitter Harvest, and I started really understanding that food could make us sick, that food supplies were really owned, and there were really issues with this. And so I wrote this book, Bitter Harvest. And I ended up in 1999 getting a call from a woman named Courtney Ross, who had a place called the Ross School in East Hampton, New York. And she said, "I eat sustainably, healthfully, organically. That's what I want for my kids. Come and develop a program." So I had a blank slate and, frankly, a blank checkbook to go in and dream up what you would feed kids and what you would teach them about food and how you would change children's relationship to food. So I'm going to talk about that story. My presentation's just about a half an hour, after which we'll go right into Q&A. And I'll really tell you what it's meant for me, who spent 30 some odd years as a chef in restaurants and hotels and cruise ships and all around, to leave all of that, and now I'm just a lunch lady. And we can talk about how that is and how it's going, and if you guys can hit the button. So I know you can't see as well as we might, especially with this light coming in. But when we started this, one of the things I had to do was really come up for a vision. What did it mean to change children's relationship to food? And why do we have to change children's relationship to food? And that really started me thinking about these issues. And the reason we have to change children's relationship to food is because food was making people sick, making the kids sick, continues to make kids sick. But the next thing was, besides that we knew what the reason was, we really had to understand why it had happened. And in Bitter Harvest, I really explored these issues around agribusiness, big companies, big multinationals, the USDA, and why it was, as chefs, we actually could feed people food that made them sick. And who decided what we fed kids? How much did marketing play into it? How much did subsidies play into it? How much did corporate profits play into it? And how much as chefs and food advocates and cooks do we really, truly make our own decisions? So I talk about agribusiness, and agribusiness are these really, really big companies. Monsanto and DuPont, who brought us Agent Orange and stain-resistant carpet, control 90% of the commercially produced seeds in America. And 10 companies, 10, with boards of less than 150 people, control 90% of the food in grocery stores, 90% of the food that's readily available to most people. So in essence, we don't necessarily decide. Whether we're chefs and making trends or whether we're following trends, we don't necessarily decide. And especially when you're in environments like healthcare, B&I, or schools where you're really on a very limited budget. So I started really thinking about these things, and I started thinking about, so how do you change a child's relationship to food? What are we going to do? Well, the first thing, and of course as chefs and cooks we know this, the first thing I started teaching kids is it needs to be regional food. It needs to come from where you are. If you want food to be healthy and you don't want it to have hundreds of thousands of miles on it, the average food travels 1,500 miles. If you want it to be somewhat local and somewhat seasonal and somewhat delicious, then we should start with local. And that's one of the things we start talking to kids about. And then we also started talking to them about organic food. Now, everybody knows about organic food, but kids don't necessarily know about organic food. So we started talking to kids about what organic food meant and what it meant to them to be eating food without additives and without preservatives, and that was without chemicals. So we started talking about that. And when we started talking about organic, some of the things that really made an issue to me that was really important were things like antibiotics and hormones. Now with kids especially, having antibiotics in food is really, really bad. So we do all hormone and antibiotic-free dairy. but 70% of all the antibiotics consumed in this country are consumed in animal husbandry. That means that we eat and drink our antibiotics in America. So when we see kids who have ear infections, who get sick, can't get better, much of it is not because the antibiotics are overprescribed, because maybe they are, but also because so much of it's in our meat, specifically beef and dairy products. So it's a really important thing to be serving kids food without hormones and antibiotics. Genetically modified organisms, it's something we probably know a little bit about. I'm not going to go into it a lot, except to say that why we need to care is there's no mandatory testing, no mandatory labeling, and we've probably all eaten GMOs in the last 24 hours and don't know that, because it's in 2/3 of all food and grocery stores. But because there's no mandatory testing, we don't know what's going to happen to our children's children. Pesticide, I love this fact, try and remember it. U.S. agriculture uses 1.2 billion pounds of pesticides each year. 1.2 billion. That means if I had a 5-pound bag of flour or sugar here and ripped it open, that pile would be how much all of us and our children and our guests consume every single year if we serve conventional produce, if we serve conventional food. So that's a really big deal. We don't want to be doing that, and especially with kids. So these are the kind of things we came up with when we started talking about how to fix this. Irradiated food, we'll talk a lot about the USDA, but irradiated food was some geniuses thought of like, okay, we have spent fuel rods and we have salmonella. Why don't we irradiate the food supply in America and then we won't have salmonella? Well, of course, irradiated food isn't better. It's not a good thing. We shouldn't be doing it. And they actually put it in the National School Lunch Program. Now, I'm really not happy with how the USDA and the government takes care of our food supply, and I'll continue that. This ad, 1947 Time magazine, DDT is good for you and me, was paid for by the USDA. So of all the things we can believe the government cares for about us, why we would believe they really have our best interest in food is beyond me. So regional food, organic food, seasonal food becomes sustainable food. And for me, that really means just food that takes care of the restaurant workers, the farms, the farm workers, and everybody we feed the food to, so that things are better when we're done feeding people food, not worse, if that can actually happen. But this is hard. You know, it's hard to talk to children about this. It's hard to talk to children about what it really means to have a sustainable food supply. Well, one of the things we start by telling them is, in less than 2 generations, just 95 years ago, 100 years ago, 95% of all Americans grew the food we ate. And today, less than 2% of us grow our food. We live in a country where there are more prisoners than farmers. There's 2.1 million prisoners, 1.9 million farmers. We live in a country where we spend $35,000 to $40,000 a year keeping those prisoners in prison. Not that they all should be let out, but we do that, and yet we spend so little money. In 1 year, $500 feeding a child in school. And so what happens with this kind of a food system? What happens with this kind of bad food with chemicals and all that stuff is food makes us sick. And worse than it makes us sick because we're adults and we get to choose, it's making kids sick. And I'd like to challenge all of you. You know, one of the things that's happened since Chefs are Stars and we're sitting here at StarChefs is people look to us. They believe that we're the stewards of the food supply. We're now celebrities. They look to us to tell them the truth about food. So I want to challenge all of you to learn about it and care about it and share that information. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has said 2 things, and this is the only other takeaway for you guys to understand this and know it. The CDC has said that of the children born in the year 2000, there are 8-year-olds in 2nd grade all across America. 1 out of every 3 Caucasians and 1 out of every 2 African Americans and Hispanics will have diabetes in their lifetime. And worse, most before they graduate high school. This means that within 1 decade, within 10 years, 40 to 45% of all school-age children in this country could be insulin dependent, and have diabetes. The CDC went further to say these 8-year-olds, these children born in the year 2000, will be the first in our country's history to die at a younger age than their parents. We've figured out a way to become extinct by feeding our children to death in America. And again, all of us are the people who can make significant change because people listen to us. People listen to chefs. We can make a huge difference. We're in an obesity crisis, some say a pandemic. 66 or 67% of all adults in America are overweight or obese. 35% of kids are overweight or obese. 10 to 12% of kids have diabetes now with a healthcare system that can barely contain itself. What's going to happen when that doubles and triples? And we don't even know, as a country, what's going to happen to people who have diabetes for 40 years, for 50 years, for 60 years, for 70 years. Because it's been an old people's disease. And we know even then, you lose your eyesight, you lose your legs, you can't think, you can't walk around, you die younger. And what's going to happen if that comes along with a high school diploma? You get your diploma and you get your insulin. I don't know. And it's all, and part of it is because of these big agribusiness companies. I mean, this is a perfect example. On the left is a USDA portion, on the right is a McDonald's or Burger King supersized portion. You know, when people feed our kids portions of French fries bigger than my head, or any food bigger than my head, and my head's kind of big, you know, what do you think's gonna happen? Well, we know what's gonna happen. The kids are gonna get sick. Now, I'm in Berkeley, and people think, oh, Berkeley must have cool food. But this is the food that was being served in Berkeley and is being served in schools all across the country. And in case you can't see that, that's grilled cheese sandwiches, corn dogs, extremo burritos, pizza pockets, and chicken nuggets. They all came into Berkeley schools in plastic and frozen. And that stuff, and I won't even call it food, was heated in that plastic and put in warmers in that plastic and put on a kid's plate, styrofoam, by the way, plate. And the first time that stuff, not food, was opened and touched by human hands was when that kid opened it up. And the USDA pays people to serve that to children. And the USDA allows all this, that's cupcakes and pink Danish and white donuts and whatever that stuff is. That's all allowed. You can serve that in schools. Would we want to be serving it in schools? What do we think that teaches a child, even tacitly, when that stuff's allowed in schools? And I don't know who invented chicken nuggets, you know, and I went to CIA in '77, and I don't know, a chicken was this thing, and you roasted it, and you might cut it, you might saute it or grill it, but, you know, we have a whole generation of children who thinks that's chicken. Let's see, a giraffe, a dinosaur, a star, a heart, or flipper. That's all chicken now. How did that happen? How do we have a whole generation of children who think they're going to die if they don't get a chicken nugget at lunch? Who convinced them of that? How do we as chefs turn that around? What are we going to do as chefs when this generation gets older and wants to eat in our restaurants and they've never seen chicken because they think it's chicken nuggets? And you want to know why we have chicken nuggets? It's because the big companies make way more money selling a chicken nugget than a piece of chicken. Because the chicken nuggets aren't necessarily chicken. And it gets to be a protein and a bread. So we'll see that at lunch today. Here's a couple of my kids eating lunch in Berkeley. In Berkeley, we've gone from that food to salad bars in every school, organic milk at lunch, all whole grain bread products, no processed foods at all, no high fructose corn syrup, no trans fats, fresh fruits and vegetables at every meal, and kids who eat it. Now, that's happened in just under 2 years. I haven't been there 2 years yet, and it's almost killed me. It's the hardest job I ever had, harder than, you know, catering for 20,000 at the top of a mountain. I mean, we go to the farmer's market and pick out the food. We have classes with kids and show them this kind of food. We have hands-on experiential learning and cooking and gardening classes. We have academic curriculum that brings it all together. We have farm-to-school programs where we bring farmers in to talk about what they do. Because there's a huge marketing piece here, a huge marketing piece. Big companies spend $20 billion a year marketing non-nutrient food to kids. McDonald's isn't a food company, they're a marketing company. They spend more money on the toys than the hamburgers. You know, it's the nag factor. Big companies have taught children to nag their parents for what they want. And so we need to get them to nag their parents to get them carrots. You know, but there's a lot of money being spent trying to get parents to get kids food that's not necessarily good. We actually cook, and this is very much an anomaly in schools. I personally, for 2 years, have been getting up at 3:30 in the morning and going in those kitchens at 5 and actually cooking and training staff who thought that box cutters were kitchen tools and had never seen a sharp knife. Those were my staff. I have 90 employees in 17 locations who had box cutters as their one kitchen tool. So we've had to teach them how to cook. I've had to market to parents and children. I've made these calendars, and they're actually on their way here. You'll get one before you leave. They were sent to the wrong hotel, so they're coming. And I've made these calendars. And on these calendars, I have our wellness policy. I actually tell the parents what it is I want to do for them. We have recipes. The recipes are taught in the cooking classes. The kids actually learn those recipes, and then we serve the recipes in the cafeteria. The menus are for the whole year. I send home a menu to every parent in the school district, and say, please have your kids buy our lunch. Because the more kids that eat, the easier it is. Positive peer pressure is really good. We have to market because I'll tell you what, McDonald's and Coke and all those big guys are certainly spending millions, if not billions, marketing. And then we have to do education. We have academic curriculum tied to the 4-5 science class. I have to teach to parents. I go to every PTA meeting and back to school night in the district talking to parents about these issues. I work with the kids all the time, trying to get them to think about these issues, trying to get them to really talk about food, to think about food in another fashion. So we spend a lot of time on these issues because we have to care. You may have garnered that the USDA and I aren't on very friendly terms, and I don't understand the pyramid at all. The pyramid with the rainbow over the top, I don't know what you do with it. Walk up the side, flag, wave the rainbow around. But this is my Healthy Kids meal wheel. All of this information, including the PowerPoint and the calendar and these meal wheels, are downloadable from my website. And the meal wheel is downloadable in English and Spanish. So we teach the kids with that. And if you notice on the meal wheel, the hamburger is really little and the vegetables are really big. We try and get kids to understand from a visual perspective, that having a hamburger once in a while is fine, but it isn't an everyday thing. We serve hamburgers once every other month, and you're going to have some hamburgers here today. And those hamburgers that we serve once every other month are grass-finished from a local California, cows, from Hearst Ranch. And that's really important. This is one of our cooking kitchens. This is actually Alice Waters' Edible Schoolyard, which many of you may have heard about. And that's actually one of my kitchens. I'm in charge of all of them. And the reason this is really important is we've now taught a generation of children that they're sitting in the back of a metal box that's moving, and it stops, and they stick their hand out, and someone they've never met and have no idea who they are hands them a bag, and then they open the bag, and whatever's in it they consume while the car's moving, and lights are flashing, and people are arguing. And we've taught children that that's dining. God help us. These are kids actually here in New York City, in the New York City Public Schools. I worked with a program called School Food Plus, and these are kids that are being taught by a chef here in New York City. The same idea, trying to change their relationship with food. This is another group of kids I worked with in New York City. It's Eat Wise, Enlightened and Aware Teens Who Inspire Smart Eating. I did a PBS TV show with these kids. These kids were great. They have a group. They go out to other schools. They try and talk to other kids about why it's important to eat healthy food. These kids were great. These kids told me a story that I want to tell you. One of the things that we also have in Berkeley is universal breakfast. Every child in Berkeley is fed a healthy breakfast in their classroom. And that's because it's a social justice issue. For kids who can't afford a healthy breakfast, they can't think, they're disruptive, they can't learn. So one of the things, and one of the ways this was really brought home to me is I was with those kids taping the PBS show, and I said, "What'd you guys have for breakfast?" These are kids in Harlem. They said to me, "Snack crack." I'm a rural kid. I didn't know. Snack crack? What do you got snack crack? I said, "What's wrong with you? You don't know snack crack?" I said, "Don't know." They said, "Our parents may be getting crack and do it on the street corners, but we have 20-ounce sodas and candy, and if we do that for breakfast first thing in the morning, we just get it as high as they do." And we feed kids that stuff. You saw the stuff the USDA said we could feed them. And when we get to your lunch today, you'll see what it is that we can feed them. Okay, but we can change. We can really make changes here. In Berkeley, we have cooking and gardening programs in 12 of our 16 schools, and we're going to have gardens in all 16 by the end of the school year. We get funding from something called the California Nutrition Network, but there are very similar programs here in New York and in Connecticut and New Jersey and in Massachusetts as well. And this helps fund these kind of programs. And this is a great entree point for any of you who want to get involved in these kind of things, because there's money that can pay for stuff. And so that's really important. So this helps fund cooking and gardening classes. Public-private partnerships. Full Bloom Baking Company was out of Menlo Park. Now they're out of Newark. I worked with them to develop whole grain pizza crusts and whole grain baked products that met my sugar content, met my fat content, met my price point, and now they're marketing those products to school districts all over California. So if you have a company and you're looking for a new outlet, there's 28 million children who get lunch in schools every day across this country. It's an amazingly big market. And right now, most of it goes to, Tyson chicken nuggets. These are more kids in the garden. So some of the things you can do is also work with the school districts. We can create, there's wellness policies. It's a great entree point. There are things that we can get school districts to do. One of them is to have recess before lunch. Sounds like, why would you want to have recess before lunch? Because if a kid runs around, then they're going to be hungry. And if the only place to go after lunch is back to class, maybe they'll sit at a table and eat and not go running out. So we found something as simple as suggesting schools do recess before lunch is fabulous. We have in California and Berkeley something called the School Lunch Initiative, and there are things like that on the East Coast as well. We have a collaboration with the Center for Eco-Literacy and the Chez Panisse Foundation in the district. I'm actually paid for by the Chez Panisse Foundation on a 3-year innovation grant to be an employee district for 3 years to make this change happen. So another thing that, some of you might want to do, I'm basically doing it as a consulting job and then hopefully taking the show on the road. Wellness policies. Every school district in America has a wellness policy in place since last year. Most of them are collecting dust on some superintendent's shelf. You should go to schools where you have kids or no kids and say, let's hear about the wellness policy. What implementation has already been done and what can be done? We need to make sure that sports and physical activity haven't gone away. This has to be part of the program. The best, healthiest food in the world's not going to make any difference if we don't get kids to get out and move. Education. There's a real dearth of education for this. We need culinary schools and other schools to be able to teach at maybe an advanced high school level basic culinary skills to people who can go into schools and work. When I say I have 90 employees, 2 were supposed to be cooks, none could, and box cutters were the only kitchen tool they had, culinary tool, I'm not lying. This is, the truth here. We need these people to be taught. So if anybody wants to help write curriculum, that's something that's really important. We need to go to 40-minute lunch periods. Most kids get 20 minutes to eat. They have to get through the line, sit down, and eat in 20 minutes. Come on, How do we expect them to eat and think about food if that's what we're doing to them? Here's my kids with salad bars. I have salad bars in every school. When I got to Berkeley, they said, you can't put in salad bars in schools because the little kids can't eat off of it and the big kids will spit in it. Well, neither happened. The little kids can really eat off the salad bars and love it because there's choice, and the older kids really respect it. It's really great. One of the things that I think it's really important, if any of you want to get into politics, is right now the National School Lunch Program is under the USDA, which is really the marketing arm for agribusiness, and I think it needs to become a health initiative under the CDC. I think as a country, we think of school lunch and education for children about food as something that's health-oriented, then we'd have a lot less problems. All right, last sort of soapbox. It all comes down to money. So I want to tell you about it because any school you go to is going to say, I want to do everything Ann's doing, but there's no money. So let me tell you the money story. In our country, our tax dollars spend $7 billion a year to feed 28 million children a lunch every day. That comes down to $2.49. Of that $2.49, most schools spend 2/3 of that on payroll and overhead. Yes, in school districts, payroll generally runs 60 to 70%, and if any of you are running that, you probably aren't long in your job, right? So, and that's what schools are doing. So they have less than 30% for food. You can do the math. That's about 80 cents for food cost. Yes, 80 cents. And by law, you have to serve milk and fruit. So what are you going to do? You're all chefs. Can we serve a healthy, delicious, nutritious lunch to kids? And oh, by the way, it has to be 650 or 700 calories. Can we do that on 80 cents? Well, duh, no. And that's why we have all this highly processed, very unhealthy food. So I think we have to double that money. And people say, oh my God, where are we going to get $7 billion? We as a country are spending $100 billion a year on diet aids. Pretty dumb, huh? We're only spending $50 billion on fruits and vegetables, but $100 billion on diet aids. We're spending $200 billion a year on diet-related illness today, with 10 or 12% of the kids with diabetes, and that's going to double and triple. NPR, yesterday when I was driving to the airport to come here, the president just asked for another $200 billion for the war for the next 90 days. So it's not that there's not $7 billion to spend on the health of children in the whole country. It's not that we don't have $7 billion. It's that we're not choosing to spend it. And I want to bring that home to you. I went this morning to Starbucks, and I got a venti cappuccino, which cost me $4.98. That's more money than I have to spend on an entire week for food cost for children. I run and I ride and I buy 2 pairs of riding or running shoes a year. Those 2 pairs of shoes cost more than I have to feed a child for food costs for an entire year. Most schools are spending less than $150 a year to feed our children. So it's not that there's not money. It's just that we have not chosen to spend it on the way we might. And so I want to challenge you all. You know, there's one of me, and I'm running around the country. I'm running this school district. I go every place. I've got 20 plane rides between now and the end of the year, going around just like this, talking to people, trying to get people interested in caring. But this is a really, really special group because you're chefs, because you're stewards of the food supply, because you have tremendous sway. Whether it's in your restaurants, whether you have a cookbook, a TV show, whether you could just go in and work with kids in school. So if all of you care about this and care about our children and our children's children's children, then just do something. Just do one thing. If you just leave this conference at the end of the 3 days and think about this issue one time and find one way, just one, where you can make a difference, that'd be great. Thank you.
So we need to give them instructions about getting the lunch.
Okay, and now you're going to get lunch, and then we'll do Q&A. There's 2 lunches. This is a typical school lunch on styrofoam. It's chicken nuggets, tater tots, Rice Krispie Treat, and coleslaw. This is actually a reimbursable meal. The government will pay us to feed kids this, and many schools feed children this every single day, something like that. And then the other lunch is a grass-fed hamburger, hormone and antibiotic-free on a whole grain roll with a little salad and lettuce and tomato, roasted vegetable fries, and a piece of fruit.
Okay, so if you have blue, You're going to come to this side of the table. My daughter Isabella will raise her hand. Raise. That's if you've got the blue ticket. If you have the other colored ticket, which I guess is green, you have the school lunch of the future. So bring them back to your table. Those of you who are sitting in the audience and want to participate, come on over here and sit at a table and participate. And share the lunch with the people that you are with, because some of you have a good lunch and some of you have today's lunch, and it would be nice to taste both. So you know how we all taste everything in restaurants, so taste everything. Okay.
Good.
And I'll bring you back.
I got into, by the way, thank you all very much for participating in this today. I hope that this has been an eye-opening experience for you all. The way that I've gotten into all this is that I've been very involved with the sort of the slow food movement, whether not directly with slow food, but sort of that whole ideology of getting farm to plate is really important. I think one of the things that, you know, in almost every good restaurant that's worth its salt these days, we're buying locally. We're buying produce from local family farms because it simply tastes better, for the first reason. Second of all, because we might believe in the ideologies underlying. But I think the most important part of these ideologies that we tend to miss sometimes are the social justice aspects of it. That good, wholesome, responsible, ecologically sound food needs to be accessible to everybody, to every cross-section of our culture, to every generation. And one of the things that I see, especially in D.C., which is a terribly segregated city, is that, you know, it's an incredibly bounteous region. And we have a lot of local family farms that are producing great stuff, and it's available to the rich, white, suburban areas. And, you know, all the top restaurants have it featured prominently on their menus. I mean, my restaurant, I'm guilty of this myself. My check average is, you know, about $65, $70. That is a lot of money to spend on a meal. That's a lot of money. And when you listen to Chef Cooper here, the amount of money that we're actually spending on our children, that the average American family is spending, is a lot lower. And that's how I got into dealing with school food through a group called DC Central Kitchen. And something that DC is trying to organize right now is something called a super kitchen that is going to provide a lot of the food through a commissary relationship through all the prisons, homeless shelters, and schools in the whole city. And as Chef Cooper was saying, the greater the volume, the greater the success, the greater buying power that you have. And of course, if we call up Cisco or U.S. Food Service, they have the purchasing power to get those apples down to 7 cents a piece, 5 cents a piece. But if you're talking to your local orchard owner, you're talking 35, 40 cents a piece. And it is that volume, and it's trying to get metropolitan areas and whole municipalities involved in volume purchasing that's going to leverage our ideologies and leverage this public health crisis. And you know, as I said, this is really a social justice issue that ranges across every section of our culture and our society. And I think that's the most important aspect of this, and it starts with our kids. So it's enough of me pontificating. Q&A.
Am I on?
Is this on? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Anyone in the audience have any questions for Barton or Ann?
So I just want to say again, too, while you're thinking of your questions, this really is a social justice issue. Somebody asked me in the audience, can kids bring their lunch in our school district? Well, yes, they can. But only the richer families can afford to make the lunch for the kids. So we've got about 41% of our kids would be free and reduced. That's out of below the poverty limit.
I have a question. My name is Marcia Ginsburg.
Tell us who you are and where you're from.
My name is Marcia Ginsburg. I'm a culinary educator from Columbus Culinary Institute. I have some concerns about possibly what kind of research has been done for the autism spectrum disorders correlating to possible food issues. Do you know anything about that?
Well, one of the things that came out in the New York Times last week was a Lancet, this is out of the UK, a Lancet study that absolutely linked preservatives and food colorings to ADD, ADHD, and hypertension. So those kids that we've all got on Ritalin, now the research is showing those kids are on Ritalin because of the food we're feeding them. Duh. But what we don't have is enough basis on the whole autism thing. And I think like anything else that's food related, there's nobody paying for the research at this point. It needs to be done. Anybody else? So the question was about universal breakfast. In our schools, every child gets breakfast together. They eat in the classroom. This is paid for by the school district. We're serving 5,000 breakfasts a day already. I'll be doing some more in a little while. I was meeting in San Francisco. They're serving less. So this is a really great program. And all our kids eat together in the classroom during the course of the school day. Really important thing that can happen in your schools.
Okay, we've got a question back here.
My name's Eugene Stoffel. My question is regarding, would be 2 points. One is that Alice Waters did her work from farm to table for with children. My other concern is that with the protein issues, there's been a lot of work done by the California Dried Plum Board, where they're mixing dried plum, either natural or some that has been fortified with pear and apple, to keep meat moist, tender, to make it antimicrobial, and would allow the schools to have much more freedom and safety, plus give them just a bit more fiber and a better taste. Have you looked at, would you consider looking to some of the boards to help you run your program?
I have not looked to any boards at this point to fund my program. I'd be happy to talk to them. I do work with Alice. She's my boss, so I'm very aware of the work she's doing. She's one of my bosses, and but we are trying to serve whole foods. So by and large, my menus, and for anyone who didn't get a menu, when we're done, you can come up. I have a whole bunch still here. We're doing whole fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, clean animal protein. So I'm trying not to serve processed foods. But I'd be happy for any help I can get.
Got a question?
Is it on? I work in the Los Angeles public school system, and I've had the pleasure of observing those breakfasts and lunches that are provided to the kids.
In Los Angeles, they're spending 56 cents per day to feed a child lunch. 56 cents on food cost in LA.
Specifically, I'm in South Central Los Angeles.
Oh,
so,
yeah, it's got to be great. Yeah.
As a social justice comment as well, and I've also observed, of course, the predominant styrofoam, which you've mentioned and observed as well. And my question is if in addition to the food, if you encountered any resistance as far as the material transitioning from styrofoam or plastics into...
No, I didn't. I mean, we just did it. I just looked at the styrofoam when I got there, and, you know, after I had a meltdown and went, how can I be even near this much styrofoam? Because we had hundreds of cases of it. We got rid of it, and I brought in compostable plates. I mean, compostable serviceware is, you know, you can get from anybody. I mean, Cisco carries it, for goodness sake. So it's not a big deal to get rid of it.
I would imagine that would be a comment that would come up as a resistance point, that styrofoam is less expensive, or if you encounter...
Yeah, you know, it's all less expensive. What's our children's lives worth? You know? I just can't go there with people.
Well, it's also less expensive now because we don't have the huge, you know, public school systems leveraging all of their weight against the purchasing power. And once that begins to happen, and, you know, you see it, that cascading as environmental concerns trickle down into the economy right now.
Anybody else? Okay. I do have more calendars. If people want them, they can come see me. I'd be happy for you to take them home and take them to schools and show them to administrators.
We have one more question.
I have about 450 kids a day at private school. And did you have, was there a big difference in the resistance from the small kids to the big kids? Because high school is really hard for...
Yeah, high school's tough. We have open campuses, and downtown's a block and a half away, and it's way cooler to go somewhere else than hang out in the cafeteria. We're doing programs, like I've got a program going on right now with Cliff Bar. Cliff has athlete mentors. We're bringing the athlete mentors into the schools. I've got free lunch for all of the home game sports teams since they come in their jerseys. So these cool kids are eating in their uniform. And so it's all about marketing. In the same way you would market your own restaurants creatively and innovatively is what we have to do.
All right. I think that's it. Well, thank you so much to Anne and Barton, and thanks to all of you guys.